Welcome back to the Psychedelic Mom podcast. I'm here today with Kiehl Friedman. How are you?
I'm doing so well. So happy to see you.
So happy to see you. I met Annie on a wild psychedelic adventures out in the British Virgin Islands. So it's nice to see you. It was so nice to meet you there.
Same. Great people.
Yes. And since then, I have read your award-winning book. I have just found out yesterday, Higher Love, which is a psychedelic travel memoir of heartbreak and healing. And it is so beautifully raw and such an inspiring story of going in and doing deep healing work. So thank you for this piece of art.
Thank you for saying that. That warms my heart.
I love the title, Higher Love. It invites readers on a globe-trotting, soul-searching journey through the healing power of psychedelics and heartbreak. And the story challenges societal pressures and invites us all to look at those pressures that we live in every day. Beyond writing, you co-founded the Psychedelic Communication Hub, which is a nonprofit dedicated to educating the public about the healing potentials of psychedelics. And you used to have a career in speechwriting, or that's where you began, and ghostwriting for prominent politicians in Hollywood. You started the Psychedelic Communication Hub to meet the need for better mainstream understanding of psychedelics and their healing potential. So it sounds like your own personal journey. I know that you had Lyme disease and you had these moments in life that were like full stops. Lyme and then a breakup that kind of led to this journey. So let's talk a little bit about how these full stops in life almost demand a life shift.
One of my friends calls them blender moments, when all of your life has just been thrown in a blender. And they tend to be very painful, but the opportunity is to look at what we've been doing and what isn't working for us. I was very good at looking externally for what society, what my family, what my high school, what the popular kids wanted from me, valued, and saw as worthwhile, and then was like pretty good at competing for those, regardless of whether they worked for me or were what I wanted. Getting Lyme's disease, being bedridden for a while after really only identifying with my brain and intellectual capacity, like academics were really important to me. So then losing my ability to think or read or carry on a conversation brought me back to fundamentals of, okay, what do I really care about? What do I value? How do I want to spend my life? And similarly with breakup with my fiance, it was, okay, I'd been doing this because this was socially validated. I was supposed to get married and have kids and go to graduate school and do those things without ever really asking, are they right for me? Is this man right for me? Is graduate school right for me? Or am I just seeking something to make me feel good enough?
It goes so deep, doesn't it?
For me, at
Those,
least, yeah.
those entrenched things within culture and family systems that we don't even notice until suddenly we do. How bad did the Lyme get for you?
Pretty bad. I think it's bad for everyone. I think it's worse for women and people raised as girls and into women. I think we are taught that our value is in how much we can give to take care of others, to fix broken men, to accept things that aren't love, and to make ourselves responsible for the ways in which they aren't love, they aren't nourishing, and to make ourselves the problem rather than leave the relationship, change the situation, etc. I'm not still struggling with it now, as far as I can tell. So for that, I'm lucky. There are a lot of people who get it a lot worse, have pick lines directly into their hearts for antibiotics. I never got that bad, but I was on like 37 different pills every day for 2 years. It was intense.
Going back to what you were just saying, just specifying that you feel like it's even harder for women. A lot of those pieces you write about in the story so vividly, just like the body comparisons It was so beautifully written because I think so many women will identify with all of those things. So how do you feel about the book and how it's being received? Actually, before you even answer that, I'm curious, you have this level of vulnerability. Has there ever been a moment that's been like, whoa? You know how sometimes you can tell people something and you'd be like, oh, the next day you're having like that feeling of like, oh, was I too vulnerable?
Yeah.
Did you ever have that in the book?
Yes. Not since I published. Though I have had people try to trigger it in me, or maybe not try, but I had somebody ask me about how I felt about all the quote unquote cringe moments I put in my book. And I was like, it's not really how I think about it, but okay.
I love the humanness of it,
Thank you.
honestly, because I just don't know anyone, in particular a woman, that hasn't experienced all those thoughts at some point.
I'm of multi minds about it because one, I'm like, these aren't your internal monologue thoughts. Like I thought everybody was thinking they were fat and worthless or too skinny and worthless, whatever,
Right.
fill in the
Whatever it is.
blank.
Too not something enough.
Exactly. Or too much. It's back to the like, oh, let that be information about them. The book I published is far from what I sat down at my computer and typed out, just letting it flow. So I made a lot of choices about what I revealed, what I didn't reveal,
Mhm.
how I revealed it. For me, there were a couple of things. One, who wants a memoir that isn't true? Like it
Right.
needs to be true.
Liberation is part of that. And you liberate others, I think, when you say what everybody is feeling.
That is what has felt delicious about the reception of this book is the women who have said, you told my story. You said what I was thinking. You said what I was feeling. I feel less alone for it. I had a 74-year-old Ghanaian woman who I was very uncomfortable sharing it with because drugs and sex and
Right.
swearing, it didn't feel like this proper Christian woman would receive it. I didn't feel like she was my audience. And I read a couple of chapters and she gave me a hug, crying afterwards, saying, you told my story. I wanted to create something beautiful, meaningful, and true. Those were my three watchwords in writing. And it's not all beautiful, but I hope there are some parts about it that are deep things. So I was rereading A Wrinkle in Time before I started writing my book. And I was in a bathtub just sobbing at Meg and what a phenomenal, relatable character person she was. And I kind of thought, why do I think that? Like, why am I connecting with her so much? This 13-year-old girl. And it was because she showed the messiness, the internal complication, that everything wasn't okay inside. And it made me realize that's how we connect to other people. It's not through perfection or masking or the
No.
things that seem impressive. That's a great way to keep people at arm's length. The way we connect is through vulnerability.
Giving people the permission.
Yeah. I was able to dismiss compliments or connection or love from people because I didn't think they really saw me or really knew me and felt like if they knew that I snack in bed, then that would be the end of it.
Hotel Snicker bars? Come on.
um,
Like,
the,
it's like
the
the
chocolate
things you'll eat in a
stains.
hotel room that you never would eat. You're like, oh, there's M&Ms, there's peanut. Oh, yeah,
Oh, and they
okay.
taste so much better that way. I think the deepest need we have as humans is to be seen and loved. Putting myself out there in this book has been both very scary and it's back to the like information about others and relationships fracturing and repairing. People I never expected, who I never felt that close to, a distant friend from high school who I haven't talked to in 20 years DM'd me on Instagram saying how much the book meant to her. And now we're like in conversation and connected. And then there are others like, oh, that's that's a little too much vulnerability. Like, that's a little,
It's fascinating, isn't it?
and that's fine. Like, that's,
Yeah, it's where people are.
yeah. And there's nowhere that I could be on that spectrum or on any spectrum that would be universally applauded.
No,
Can't do it.
never. And it's
Ultimately,
interesting, if I really think there's so many ways to make impact in this world, and so many messages that you would want people to know. But the message that I think is like, as a woman and as a mother of 3 daughters, I use the word deconstruction, but it's the unbecoming to become, in a way. It's the unbecoming all that was told for you to be. And in that, a lot of that languaging and self-criticism and those reflections in the book, it's almost a mirror to society, not actually you. It's a mirror to that. To me, like, reading it, and then also because I am someone who believes that psychedelics do have the capacity to allow for this deeper work to happen, allow for more of this authenticity to take place. I think it's such a powerful book for women. I really do. And I even think for like younger girls to have the opportunity to hear some of these messages so that they can start seeing now what Instagram is doing to them, what the messaging is doing to them, how much they're trying to please in a room and dress a certain way for others. It's like,
I wrote it so that young women wouldn't have to get engaged to charming narcissists to realize that, well, and then get dumped by charming narcissists, like,
right.
and go through that whole thing to begin to realize that love is very different from control. Those two are not the same thing.
As you say that, you said a couple of things in your book about your fiance, like rubbing your
Oh, yeah.
makeup off. Can you just say a couple of those things? Because I was like, oh, wow.
Yeah, he didn't like it when I wore makeup. So not all the time, but I remember once particularly we were going to dinner with some of his friends and I wanted to look nice. So I had done my hair and makeup and we got into the elevator and he took 2 hands and just like wiped my face and then pulled the barrette out of my hair because he liked my hair down. It was not a gentle rubbing off of makeup. But I didn't think about the fact that I would never, never do that to somebody else. I think what we get taught about quote unquote real men is frequently about toxic men, not the divine masculine, not a loving partner, not somebody in touch with empathy and gentleness and sensitivity. But I was so empty of self-worth that him choosing me and him knowing what he wanted from me was like, oh great, this is a new version of school. Like, I know what the metrics are. I just need to be 15 pounds skinnier, only wear natural fibers. Like, just make a list of all of his rules and then live by them, and then I will be good enough and lovable and safe and everything will be okay. And if love comes with a list of what you need to do to be worthy of it, it is not love.
Yeah. And it's interesting too, because these messages get internalized as women, and then we project them onto other women,
Yeah.
even as like a mother. Like, I think of the ways that some of those messages of my own mother,
Yeah.
of how she lived in that system,
Yep.
and then in some ways to keep her daughter safe,
Right.
or in the hierarchy of
Yes.
power dynamics that are really
Yeah.
unconscious, of be like this, look like this, behave like this. And then you're like, wow, I partook in that
Yeah.
system.
I think what you said about being safe is really important. I don't think anybody's doing this. Well, I'm sure there are some people doing this to torture others, but I think
Right.
so much of it is emotional and fear-based, but also epigenetically emotional and fear-based. How many women did they burn for having healing gifts, for being in touch with their intuition, for being
Having a
powerful,
voice.
having a voice? Yes.
Like, this is really in the
Oh,
DNA.
yeah.
Absolutely.
Women only got the power to have credit cards in the 1970s. I think that's
Yep.
right. Like,
Mhm. And I
um,
just heard that it wasn't until the 1980s that a woman could accuse her husband of rape.
yes, yes, yes.
1980.
1980 until vanishingly recently,
Yes.
our survival as women has depended on being socially acceptable, being protected, and being,
Having a male
yeah.
partner.
This is deep and real and coming from our DNA. So when I am being gentle to myself, I try to remind myself that this isn't,
Exactly.
I, we didn't do it to ourselves. Our
No.
mothers didn't do it. I mean, sure, they had part, but we are all victims in this, and it comes from a very real place. It is viscerally terrifying to confront an alligator in the same way that it is viscerally terrifying to stand up, use our voices, be visible, be strong. That could mean that we're rejected.
Whoa.
Like that is another
Yeah.
survival threat, real survival threat.
Mhm. So what's next for you?
Mm. I'm both trying to figure it out and not trying to figure it out. The book has been in the world since June 4th, and I promised myself that I would not abandon it for at least 6 months. Like, I have to do the things. I don't know what I'm supposed to do, but I'm still trying to, but like, I know that I'm supposed to be promoting it. I'm trying to, but like, I know that I'm.
I mean, it's amazing. I haven't read a book like that in a while. So it was so fun to listen to and actually to hear your voice. It is so good.
Oh,
You're such an amazing
thank
writer.
you.
I'm so excited for this book.
Oh, thank you. That compliment that you just gave me is one of the most meaningful to me because the book deals with heavy subject
Heavy.
matter. There's suicidal ideation. There, like, it isn't all light, but I was really committed. I really wanted it to be a fun read. Like, I
It
really
is such a fun read.
thank you. And that's not what feels best about it. The best part is I really hoped it would help others avoid some of the unnecessary pain.
And even if it's just like the first spark, like I can think of books along the way that just radically shifted my thought on something. You know, a lot of people point to A New Earth or like Wherever You Go, There You Are, John
Mhm.
Kabat-Zinn.
Mhm.
It's an opening of an invitation because I think a lot of people even aren't even really aware of the voice in their head and what it's saying to themselves, and they're not that
Yeah.
voice.
I think that's totally true. I read Eat, Pray, Love right after a bad breakup, not the fiance breakup, but a bad breakup. And I loved the book. I really enjoyed it. I love Elizabeth Gilbert, she's a phenomenal writer. And I was so disappointed, nearly to the point of crushed, that it ended with her happy and in love in a relationship. Like, I just remember aching for a story of a woman building a life that was joyful and fulfilling regardless of romantic status, that wasn't dependent on finding a man to love her.
I have a couple friends who have written books, but they're like waiting for the ending. And I'm
Mm,
like, what's the ending though? And it's that. It's like, well, it doesn't, so you can't tie it up in a pretty bow yet because like I haven't met the one.
if your happiness is dependent on meeting the one, that means the one can take it all away.
Right.
That feels like an incredibly powerless place to be. I have to be the source
Yeah.
of my
You are the
joy,
one.
my contentment, my meaning, and my love. And then I can give it freely and then I can accept it freely. But if
Right.
I need it, then what machinations am I going through? I'm probably doing a bunch of contortions to try and prove that I'm what this person wants when
Uh-huh.
it will never feel fulfilling if it's not for who I am.
You mentioned in the book that your first psychedelic was really a yoga retreat. Bring me there and what was psychedelic about that retreat?
Sure. So, in the midst of the Costa Rican jungle, in a particularly low point, I was sobbing by myself alone in a chair, feeling self pitying for no particularly good reason. And out of nowhere, I heard my friend laugh. And then I dismissed it. And then I heard it again. And then I heard her words. And it was the simple phrase, "You were born." What was psychedelic about the experience was how much information and feeling those words conveyed, that I knew that when she was saying, "You were born," what she was saying was, "You're meant to be here. You deserve to be here. You're the perfect person to be sobbing in this chair right now." Like, whatever you are doing was intended. The universe doesn't make mistakes. You are wanted and loved by existence. It was important to me to put that experience in the book because it gave me context for understanding the lessons and insight that came through on psychedelics later, where I think if I hadn't experienced something like that sober, maybe I would have been more dismissive of the experience being drug induced, whereas those pieces of wisdom and insight came through, felt true in a way that when you're only engaging with something intellectually, there are plenty of things I take on faith that are true. I understand airplanes fly because of aerodynamics, don't understand aerodynamics. The internet is kind of bad right now because it's raining, have no clue how that works. But I believe that it works, but it doesn't feel true in a way that these psychedelic insights, the ones I put in my book, felt truer and more deeply representative of reality than the reality that I was engaging with on a daily basis.
I think it's interesting too, because as we were mentioning, some of the conditioning of women, and a lot of it, it does end up being like physical about our bodies. And we're supposed to balance all these things perfectly and not have anything that's out of balance. And so your description kind of being at the yoga studio and coming back to your body, you were just mentioning how so much of conditioning, if it's for achievement, we really live in our heads. So what was it like for you to come back into your body at that point?
Scary. And I just couldn't agree with you more. I think women are taught to disembody a lot, to think of our bodies as objects, as social and sexual objects. Like, how can my body be acceptable to those around me, as opposed to what can it do? What is it telling me? I'd never been particularly good at living in my body, but Lyme's disease was a really good reason to exit. I remember going in for long IV drips and consciously thinking, I'm going to cut off my left arm for the next hour and a half, 2 hours. Like, I'm not going to feel, and I never thought, like, okay, now I'm going to reattach my left arm. Now I'm
Right.
going to remember myself. Wisdom is stored in the body. Some of the wisest, truest messages I have gotten have been from listening to my body. And it was really scary. It still is. It still can be really scary to listen to it because there's decades of things that I didn't want to feel stored there.
It's such a beautiful process to begin even though, isn't it? That return to the body that you're disembodied from, but also, as you said, scary.
Yeah, I don't know that I experienced it as beautiful. I just experienced it as terrifying and overwhelming and adversarial. I would say a big thread of the book is learning to relate to my body as a friend, as something worthy of deep respect rather than demanding obedience of it. God, I love Mary Oliver. Let the soft animal of your body love what it
Love what
loves.
it loves. That line is so powerful because when you realized you haven't done that for so long, and then you're asked these questions by a friend or a therapist, wherever, like, well, what do you want? It's like, what? I remember being like a puppy dog. My
Yeah,
head went like back and forth like 10 times, like, huh?
yeah,
What do you mean?
yeah,
How do
yeah.
you feel? Like, what do you notice in your body? My body?
I love the phrase, the soft animal of your body. If you just say the animal of your body, you can imagine something fierce. But when you say the soft animal of your body, you can still imagine something fierce, but being soft. The body's communication tends to be nonverbal. So, how do I relate with gentle, loving energy to this scared, soft animal? I would never abuse an animal like I have been willing to abuse myself. Like the way I talk to myself, the way I treat myself. I would never starve another being. Like, why did I think that that was not only acceptable for me, but what I deserved?
It's that pretty, perfect, and pleasing thing, and then a standard that is really impossible.
Society tells us to be strong women and then hates strong women and does everything it can to destroy sources of power, to have us focus our incredible energy in ways that make corporations billions of dollars. Like happy, whole women spend a whole lot less on diet pills and contouring and whatever
Right?
the new,
Cosmetics
yeah.
and yeah, yeah. Your focus was communication always, like this deep communicating. It's fascinating too because I know in this process, when we're living in our head, there's like a level of communication. And then you talked about this first experience in the jungle where like nature or some intelligence through a sound, a laugh of your friend is communicating this deep wisdom. Since you've gone through this process, how do you feel like your communication with yourself and others has changed?
I think becoming softer and more receptive, not cutting off my body, means that there's a whole lot more information coming in. When it was just my head dealing with things, the questions were, how can we break down this process into the 10 steps that will get us where we're going as quickly as possible? The more open I've become to non intellectual ways of knowing, being willing to trust the non intellectual parts of myself to have wisdom and value, and allowing them not only a seat at the table, but maybe board chair in determining what I lead with.
So, psychedelics have become a big part of your life and advocacy now. And what's that relationship? These plant wisdoms that are here that communicate with us. What was your first experience?
Psychedelics have become important in my life because I believe they are tools that can be used to unlock healing that we need as we are undergoing a mental health epidemic, a loneliness epidemic, a disconnection with nature epidemic. There's a lot that needs to be healed. I am not passionate about psychedelics for psychedelics' sake. I also don't think psychedelics are special among plants or even special among drugs. Part of my passion for psychedelics is just related to dismantling the stigma around drugs, the stigma around mental health, the stigma around having a hard time walking through this incredibly complicated, difficult, and oppressive world. My advocacy comes out of a desire to be in solidarity with those who don't share my privilege. If you have a criminal conviction, if you are a person of color, if you have debilitating mental health challenges, these all make it much, much, much more difficult to advocate for yourself, to access these medicines that might help. So I felt like it was important as a privileged white woman to say, no, I'm struggling with these things. These things helped me. Maybe we should approach all drug use with greater compassion, empathy, and curiosity. I'm really, really turned off by the hype around psychedelics. They will not cure everything. They cannot cure everything. Anybody who tells you they will in an unmitigated way, like, do not trust them, run away. And I'm hoping that our social future is one where we focus on the disease, which is systemic oppression, loneliness, trauma, and stop pathologizing what people do to cope with circumstances that are intolerable. My first psychedelic experience, my first substance psychedelic experience, if you don't include cannabis, which I think you very well can and should include cannabis, but if you don't, was psilocybin mushrooms, technically truffles, in Amsterdam with my dad, where we intended to take a recreational dose and just have some fun and giggle and walk around the city. And I
So
was
wild. Like even that, it's so you throw that out like that's common. That is a really interesting relationship that you had with your dad. How old were you?
29, 30,
Mhm.
somewhere in there.
And you went with him maybe to a conference?
Yeah,
Yeah.
my dad works in economic development, and it was an anti-poverty conference, and my dad traveled a lot when I was young. So one of the ways we would spend time together is he would take me on work trips with him and take me to conferences with him. So this was the history we have together of traveling and going to conferences. So he was invited to a conference outside of Amsterdam. I'd never been. He invited me to go with him. I have a pretty rigid rule of saying yes when people invite me places I've never been. People have commented on how strange or unexpected it is to do psychedelics with my dad. And I definitely understand that. He's a fun guy to hang out with. Like,
Yeah,
why
and
wouldn't
it
we want to
actually
laugh
it's
together?
funny because I don't actually think it's strange. I think in our Western model, it's strange, right? Because in other cultures, this is
Yeah.
commonplace. It's how these plants were used, really, within community, within family. I just think it's really nice that you had that opportunity at such a young age.
I think it contributed a lot to my feeling of safety. Like, my dad is not a hellraiser. The fact that we were doing it together and went into the shop together and asked the guy all the questions together and read the pamphlet together kind of felt like, well, nothing bad can happen to me if
Right.
my dad's here and my dad's doing it too, which isn't necessarily bulletproof logic, but
No,
it made
but
sense at the time.
and what was that experience for you like?
I think it was in part so delicious because I didn't expect it. I had no idea what to expect. It was about 6 months after my breakup with my fiance that was just devastating, and I'd been in a pretty dark black hole of depression for those months. So simply having the experience of laughing so hard, my belly and cheeks hurt was like, oh, thank God.
That was probably part of the best thing about the trip where you and I just were, like, some of the laughing and thinking, "Oh my god, I haven't laughed as hard in a long time."
It's like what we're alive
That's
for,
the gift.
right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's laughter is the biggest psychedelic there
That's
is.
why when people want to privilege medical psychedelic use, like, well, these people are doing it for a real and good reason.
Exactly.
Having 30 minutes of laughter when you haven't experienced rays of light in days or weeks or months or years, that is healing. That is
Right?
medicinal. That is therapeutic. So,
Leave it to the Western model to strip the fun out of
right,
the psychedelics,
right,
right? Like,
right.
let's just talk about PTSD and trauma
Mhm.
created by the Western ailments that now we're gonna cure.
Well, and to strip the joy out of healing. Like, oh, that couldn't be
Exactly.
valuable, which is another thing, maybe not a theme of the book, but the ways in which I was taught or society taught me to not value my own joy. That work is what matters, productivity is what matters.
Right.
What you can
And
do for
pleasure.
other, yeah.
Yeah, what's that like to suddenly, through the wisdom of your healing journey, and there's many layers, the laughter, the time with your dad, the psychedelics themselves, but to come back not only to your body, but to some joy and pleasure.
Interestingly, that is what remains the biggest challenge for me. I feel like I've done a lot of good work unearthing and dismantling a bunch of other mental structures that kept me miserable. It is still hard for me to value my joy. My first instinct is like, okay, but what should you be doing? And I have to remind myself I should be enjoying this precious life that is always on its way out, and there's always something there to appreciate.
Yeah.
And what an ungrateful sod I would be to not take a moment of pleasure in, my neighbor's hibiscus that is just
Luscious.
blossoming. Like, yeah, I do not believe that whatever higher power force, whatever connects us through time and space, I cannot believe that whatever that is wants us to be miserable. why would they make I don't know, but like, why would life, actual nature, wildlife be so beautiful if we're not supposed to enjoy it?
Why would laughter and connection feel so good?
Right? That's what humanity is, right? Or the best of it.
So in the book, you come across some shame,
Yeah.
and I'm curious what you think about shame. And we went right from pleasure to
Yeah.
shame. Look at that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Let's right to the shame.
So
We
funny.
talking about joy too
Yeah,
much?
yeah, yeah.
Um, uh,
Gotta get back to something that matters. Yeah.
um, when do you feel like shame is relevant, and when is it not relevant?
Yeah. I'm so glad you asked. This has been and continues to be a journey for me. Um, and thanks to the help of a very good therapist, I realized I was carrying around all this shame about who I was. The only time that we should actually feel shame, guilt, that they're very similar, related, um, is when we have hurt someone, when we have done something that does not align with our values or who we want to be. But if it's just about who you are, that's not yours to carry. That is society trying to hand you an ugly sweater and make you wear it for eternity. This is not yours. Take it off. Don't be itchy. Like, um, shame is a tool of social control that has no place to be internalized. If you haven't hurt anyone, and if it is something about you that is out of your control, not yours, drop it.
Right.
So that's what I try to remind the soft animal in my body. Drop it. Just drop it.
Exactly. It's funny to suddenly notice something and then go, "Oh, you're not gonna go down that rabbit hole, are you?"
Right. And not all the time am I able to stop myself. Some of the time, like, I am just like flying down that slide to shame, self-hatred, self-recriminating, but it's been a real learning to choose not to, at least some of the time, and give
Right.
myself credit for that. Um, and then each time you manage to stop yourself, it makes it easier to stop yourself the next time. Shame has this pull of it's where I'm supposed to be. And it can be, again, really scary to deny that, to make the brave choice of no, actually, I'm gonna believe I'm worthwhile. Like,
Yeah. I mean, you certainly had the experience in the jungle, and you can certainly have those moments of deep wisdom coming about your inherent worthiness, about who you are. I mean, it's always right here. Nothing is needed, but it is interesting how visceral the work with the
yeah.
psychedelics, or not work, even that word, working with psychedelics. I'm curious, what have relationships taught you? Because this was a journey of healing the relationship with yourself induced by this breakup.
Yeah. I first wanna say, like, I do not believe in an psychedelic exceptionalism, and I have had exceptional experiences with psychedelics.
Yeah,
And they
love that.
were very, very powerful, and I think I needed something very, very powerful to shake me out of very entrenched mental ruts. And I don't know that I could have done it through psychotherapy, talk therapy, breath work. Like, there are plenty of other methods that are valid, valuable, and work. I needed psychedelics.
I would say me too, and I think partly because when that conditioning is so strong,
Yeah.
it takes, like, something to crack it.
The felt sense.
Yeah,
You can talk for days, months, and never have that felt sense of, "Oh, I am part of everything. I belong to this world. I'm a divine spark worthy of love." Those are all words that don't change
right.
anything unless they come with a felt sense of truth. And that's what I got from psychedelics that I didn't get from other things. What has helped me see relationships clearly and pursue healthier ones, is accepting that any relationship of sufficient depth will hurt me. I will be hurt by this person. That's not a problem. If there is fracture and repair, the relationship gets stronger. I don't know that I had had enough experiences with relationships where the repair worked such that I learned to believe that good relationships can withstand hurt on both sides, and that good relationships are all about coming back to the table with love as the baseline, trying to fix it. The difference between something that goes sideways with who comes back to me saying, "Oh, I'm really sorry I hurt you. Like I
Right.
did not mean what I said, or the way I said it conveyed something else, or great, I won't use that term again because I know it triggered," whatever it is. That is a bright green flag for continued intimacy, depth, and engagement. If I can vulnerably share that I was hurt and the person comes back with how that was my fault, what I should have
Yeah.
done differently, that they,
Didn't happen.
yeah, that they didn't mean it, so that should make it immediately go away. That is information about the relationship available with that person. It is not
Definitely.
information about my value. It is not information that I shouldn't have been hurt or shouldn't have been open about being hurt, but it is information about how safe I am in that relationship. It has made all the difference in the world to be able to see that and not make people's responses to me about me.
It would have been so nice to learn these tools young and to know the red flags, what is mine to hold, what somebody else's, don't you think?
Oh my God.
It seems so simple.
Wouldn't it change literally everything in this instance? I have two responses to that. One is yes, it would be absolutely great and would have saved me so much pain. The other answer is if we'd known it all along coming in, what would we do with the rest of our lives?
Play.
Maybe, but like
Maybe.
maybe
Yeah.
that play is that much more precious knowing having fought for it, having struggled to get there. Maybe that's just something I'm telling myself to make me feel better about not having known it. But then I also think these aren't constructs that come out of nowhere. Somebody is feeding them to us, and somebody benefits from the ways in which women strive to be less than they are, the way we eat all of the discomfort in a room so nobody else has to feel it. That's a service. It makes it comfortable for those in power. It is helpful for me to remember when I'm feeling the tug of I should be skinnier, or I should be more pleasing, I should be nicer, I should smile more.
More ...
Yeah, I'm hearing that in my head, but who's saying it
Right.
and who
Right.
benefits from me doing that? It has been I would say, a powerful source of courage for me to remember that I actually want to be in solidarity with fat people, with indigenous people, with otherwise disabled people. Like, name the marginalized group. I don't want to serve the systems of oppressive hierarchy as they exist. That's not doing anything good for anyone. And we can point to the trauma it is causing now and the lives it is costing now. It can be really uncomfortable to shake off the expectations, but it's ultimately more aligned with who I want to be.
So how does that align with the work that you do?
With the Psychedelic Communications Hub, basically I saw a vacuum of information that if we didn't fill with a nonprofit would be filled by industry. And I fundamentally have skepticism toward information provided with a profit motive. Again, I think psychedelics are incredible healing tools with incredible potential. And any powerful tool can be used for good or ill, particularly when we're talking about a society that has very little historical construct for how to integrate psychedelic medicines into healthy societies, communities, families. There's a whole lot of education and shaping of norms that needs to be done so that people stay safe. Psychedelics are a powerful tool. Any powerful tool can cause serious harm. We don't talk about that enough. I think those within the psychedelic movement, we have been so eager to see society embrace the potential that some of us have been hesitant to talk openly about what can go wrong for fear that it will derail greater acceptance. And I just feel so differently at the core of my bones. The only way to do this well is to be a trustworthy broker of reliable information that gives people what they need to keep themselves safe. Every time we get into a car, there's a risk of an accident. There's nothing that is completely safe. But if we don't let people know about the bad things that can happen, there is no such thing as informed consent. I see psychedelics in the same vein with cannabis or even opioids. They can do really good things. They are important, powerful tools to those who need them. If done wrong, if done uncarefully, if done without respect for Indigenous rights, sovereignty, intellectual property, people will die unnecessarily. There will be really devastating impacts on Indigenous communities that have already been criminalized and some even genocided for their traditional religions and stewardship of these medicines. We got to have serious, responsible conversations about how we do this right and differently than public health campaigns have been done in the past.
So, how do you do that? How do you support that mission? Do you meet with companies, individuals?
There are three main prongs of the way we work. We are a convener of the psychedelic ecosystem. We have about 90 partners now, mostly nonprofits, some for profits. And the idea on the convening is no one person or one organization has the answers to all of these questions. We need to be in honest, deep, trusted conversation with each other to figure out the path forward. And that needs to be a small d democratic gathering. It can't have a covert agenda that is trying to push out through partners. We see the client of the Psychedelic Communications Hub as the future that we want to see in psychedelics. So that is what we are always trying to steward, is what would this movement look like? How would it sound if issues of justice and sustainability and the voices of the marginalized were centered? If we ceded this space to industry, what we would get is whatever messages were most politically expedient. And what we are doing is intentionally over-indexing on vulnerable populations to make sure that their concerns are heard and at the center of any movement communications we are putting out there.
So, if we had a barometer of how the psychedelic movement is doing in taking the wisdom gleaned from these tools on the very individual, personal level of inherent worthiness, the interbeingness of all people and beings, the cause and conditions of all of life, that there is something we don't need to name because we can't, and anybody who pretends to be able to name awareness, consciousness, whatever, can't, but we are all in relation to it in some quantum field that we don't understand, with the structures that currently exist in the world that also exist within psychedelic culture. How do you think we're doing?
I wish I were more optimistic than I am. maybe even the overwhelming majority of those of us involved in this space are here for the right reasons, to crib a line from The Bachelorette. So I think the intentions are good. This game is playing out on a field of capitalism, and money is a proxy for power. So if only the experts, the people who need it the most, the people who have been doing this deep work on these issues with these plants, with these communities for years and decades, if only they were the ones determining where this movement goes and is going, I would feel a lot more confident about that it will result in some place that I am proud of having been a part of. I am deeply concerned that that's not where we're going. Psychedelics often result in evangelism about psychedelics and untempered evangelism about psychedelics. They just like somebody has a phenomenal transformative experience and suddenly they think everybody should be on psychedelics.
Probably almost everyone.
Right.
First, right? It's like, you have to do this.
Yes. And it's like, don't get divorced. Don't
Right.
like move to another country and don't start funneling millions of dollars into psychedelics. Like, just let the experience settle a bit.
Right. Give it time.
Give it time. There's so many people who have had challenging experiences with psychedelics who, because of where they sit in society, had access to really high quality support for those challenging experiences.
Totally.
Most people don't have that.
In my own experience with psychedelics, had I not had support, whether it's psychedelic integration specialist or a therapist, it can be incredibly destabilizing. It can be very confusing as you're deconstructing all these ideas of yourself.
Yes.
All these ideas of what society has taught you, your religion. I mean, you're talking about stripping away the layers of everything you've known to come to some other knowing. But without having people that have gone through that process in a way that is honest and true and solid and whole, how do you ever begin to do that on your own with psychedelics?
10,000%.
Is it possible?
I'm sure it's possible. I'm sure people have done it. That it's not how I did it. I had great mental health support and access to people with a lot of psychedelic experiences who could talk me through this stuff and say like, oh no, that's not weird. That's what happens with ayahuasca, or that's what and could contextualize the experience for me in a way that made it not so scary. We haven't built the support systems. We haven't built the support systems. We haven't built the understanding. Persistent derealization. Some data show that can happen for 10 and up to 25% of people after a psychedelic experience. I've experienced it. It was really scary.
So for someone who doesn't know what that is, could you explain what that is?
Not well. From an academic perspective, we talk about ego dissolution as if it's
the goal.
And if it's unquestionably good and like will be this phenomenal experience. For me, it wasn't. I talked with somebody who's like, well, if that was your experience of it, it wasn't really ego dissolution. I'm like, maybe not. Who knows? I'm not going to get stuck on that. But it was this feeling of having all of my preferences removed from me. I don't particularly like olives, but it in this state was like, yeah, you do. Every idiosyncrasy felt wiped away. And I felt I am part of everything and therefore I am nothing, in a way that makes it kind of impossible to make yourself breakfast and much less do something more complicated. Like it felt like all of my systems for meaning had fallen away. And how do you do anything when you don't care about anything anymore and nothing means anything? And
it's interesting. I interviewed a woman too, and we were talking earlier about the conditioning of women. And this idea of ego dissolution, it happened to her as well. And she really went into solipsism for a while. And then just had this realization, like maybe when you're like wiping a butt all day and you're throwing away diapers and you not even sleeping, and your breast is now feeding
Oh, yeah.
someone else. Do you really need to dissolve the ego more?
Right?
Like, maybe that person actually
Yeah.
needs some ego boosting. Maybe
Totally.
there's some holding that needs to take
Yeah.
place before you totally take away someone's ego. And what you're talking about is really interesting because obviously with certain medicines like a 5-MeO DMT, the ego dissolution can be so fast. Ancient cultures for so long, like take Theravada Buddhism and nothingness and everything and form is not form, the Heart Sutra, it's living in that place. But if you don't have that context
Yeah.
of anatta, no self, and the ability to actually be in both
Yeah.
the self, the ego at the same time simultaneously with nothingness, pretty challenging to live your life that way.
Yeah. No, it's either extreme is in some ways much easier. Like being a wholly materialist and
Right.
just a like death grip on your ego, or having given it all up and transcended. It's that living in the middle of trying to hold on to compassion and your interconnectedness with everything and getting to your appointments on time.
And like
Hard
you
to
were
do
saying, your
both.
preferences, the things
Yeah.
that actually make you unique. It doesn't mean preferences as
Right.
far as like prejudice and things
No,
like
no,
that,
no, no,
but your
no.
unique preferences.
We're not
Yeah.
all supposed to be the same. I had an intern once who loved doing data entry. I was like,
Mhm.
hallelujah for you. This is why we have
Right?
preferences, because
Right.
like it's a
Mhm.
great way of dividing what we get to do, because I'm very bad at data entry. Very,
Yeah,
very
me
bad.
too. I definitely have my skill sets and then my ones that are like, "Oh god, thank God you can do that."
And you love doing it
Mhm.
and you
Mhm.
love getting it right. Whereas I'm like, I don't know. It was supposed to be 53, it's 54. What could go wrong? And it's like, oh,
Right.
that could go very wrong.
Very wrong.
Yeah, you should definitely double check. And I'm like, it's probably fine.
So last question, I've been really envisioning a modern global transcultural medicine bag. Medicines from all over. So
That's
the last few
beautiful.
episodes I've done, and I've just asked people 3 medicines that they'd have in the bag, and it can be a psychedelic or a non-psychedelic. What would your medicines be?
For me, cannabis would be one of them. That is a sacred plant ally of mine. Can music be one of them? Okay,
Definitely,
definitely
yes.
music. Good wordless with a heavy drum, or anything Mozart. And then this may not be specific enough, but if you're accepting music, I'm going to keep pushing
Mhm.
the envelope. Nourishing food. I had a teacher in seminary who said, if you want to be grounded, eat something from the ground. And I think about that a lot. And I think about how anxiety spins us up into the ether and out of connection. And I think about how hangry I can get and just totally emotionally unregulated when
Right.
I've been thinking that like, well, I just need to finish this and then I will reward myself with a meal.
Mm.
No, feed yourself first,
Mhm.
resource
Mhm.
yourself. Some delicious pieces of fruit.
Thank
A
you.
bright summer peach, that's what I'm saying.
Fried summer peach, I love it.